Poetry lovers, it's another video. This time from The Destruction of Sennacherib by Lord Byron. This isn't going to be a video about how to answer a question for the AQA Power and Conflict module, but it will help you think about the poem and hopefully unlock some greater levels of kind of sophistication in your thinking about it, I suppose. Hopefully, that's the ambition anyway. So it tells the story, the epic kind of struggle of this man, King Sennacherib. He tried to invade Judea, which is modern day Israel, twice. Once he was unsuccessful, the second time he was successful. So it comes from Byron's source material is Book 2 Kings in the Bible and the Book of Isaiah, which is later. So that's where Byron's source material is. He's someone that would have read the Bible and been kind of taken by the kind of epic kind of language, I suppose, of the narrative. So that's a bit about what's going on, but we're going to unpack that in a little bit more detail. So Sennacherib was a king of Assyria. The Assyrians were an ancient civilization in what's roughly now Iraq, and they were contemporaries with the Babylonians, which were a rival civilization. So he tries to invade Judea, modern day Israel, twice, for just because that's what civilizations do. They try and conquer territory. And according to the Bible, Kings 19:35, book chapter 19 verse 35, an angel struck down 185,000 men in the Assyrian camp. And this loss is explained in the Bible partly because the Israelites are God's anointed people. Hence, Byron's angel of death and destruction. I shouldn't have that in square brackets. That's quite relevant. So this has been a poem that's inspired many people in popular culture. In 19th and 20th century, you don't really need that. But let's talk a little bit about verse and meter. So verse form is it's composed of lines, and those lines are made up of feet, which are basically a repeating rhythmic unit. And the repeating rhythmic unit is it's any one of these. So whether it's an anapes, where we have two unstressed followed by a stressed long syllable. So unstressed, unstressed, stressed, unstressed, unstressed, stressed. So the stress is basically the long syllable. And when we have three of them, we have three of them here. 1, 2, 3, or even 4. Yes, 1, 2, 3, 4. Yes, we have 4. So this is a tetrameter, sorry. Yes, so a tetra meaning 4 pairs of syllables. It does vary though, there are trimeters in this poem as well, so watch out for that. And it's supposed to mimic the rhythm of galloping horses. So Tennyson's Charge the Light Brigade appears to strive with the same effect from its kind of structure. It has an anapestic tetrameter as well. So if we read it out, we might be able to hear it. And the sheen of their spears was like stars on the sea. So this is very similar to "'Twas the night before Christmas when all through the house." Christmas before Christmas. Christmas is the long syllable. So we can sometimes hear it. Don't worry if you can't hear the long syllable because, or the stresses, because in ordinary speech we tend not to be as over-intentional about how we're talking and how we're saying words. But sometimes you can hear it, sometimes you can't. And in any case, you can come to YouTube for all of the rest if you can't hear it. So basically, to get back on, just to quickly summarize what verse and meter is all about. The meter is basically just a line, and it's composed of different feet. So feet is anapestic, refers to the stress structure, and tetrameter refers to the number of times it happens. So what kind of meter is it? It's one that's got 4 lots of anapes. So and the sheen of their spears was like stars on the sea. Okay, so that's anapestic tetrameter for you. Iambic is it's an unstressed and stressed, so it's da-dum. So you can have da-dum, da-dum, da-dum is kind of I won't try and mimic some stresses for you, but basically this is for you. Why not take a screenshot of this? This is very useful. But when you study, as you go into each exam, you'll know hopefully about the verse and meter of the poem, and you'll know more than just it rhymes or it doesn't rhyme. And it is good to use. Still, I know this may be daunting now, but it is very good to. There's not a lot to it apart from all the things I've just mentioned, and it's very good to just mention, talk about that in passing, and to talk about the structure of it, and to compare poems like that. So you might want to compare Tennyson's Charge of Light Brigade on the same basis as well. Okay, right. So as we know, King Sennacherib tries to attack the city of Jerusalem. He's later successful, and we know historically that he was successful, and Jerusalem actually had to pay tribute to Sennacherib, so they had to pay taxes. But Hezekiah, the fearful king that we see in the Bible, praying for God to save them, was actually allowed to remain king. However, in this episode in the Bible, the Old Testament that Byron is drawing from, he comes upon the cities of Judah and tries to take over. However, Hezekiah, the king of Judah, prays to God and received a reply through the prophet Isaiah that he would defend the city to save it for mine own sake and for my servant David's own sake. So an avenging angel in the night visits Sennacherib's camp and destroys his army, pushing the king to return to Nineveh, which is an ancient city in modern-day Iraq. Very beautiful place, where it was, apparently. You can see a lot of the kind of things that have been recovered from there in various museums across the world, namely also as well the British Museum. It's suffered a lot in recent years, actually, with everything that's been happening in Iraq. So the poem takes its events chronologically. It starts with the Assyrians besieging Jerusalem, or trying to, and then moves on to the angel visiting the camp, quietly killing everything that it came into contact with. Here Byron does take his liberty, so he invents things, pulling forth gratuitous and wondrous imagery of the siege and the murder of the Assyrian army. So, as we'll see, so let's read it out. The Assyrian came down like a wolf on the fold, and his cohort were gleaming in purple and gold. So, fold and gold, it's kind of it has a nice rhyming kind of structure going on, end rhymes. This just makes it sort of a little bit kind of it really, there's nothing deeper going, I would say, than it's just being enjoyable to read. And when something does have a nice end rhyme like that, it kind of is slightly lighter in tone than something that doesn't. And the sheen of their spears was like stars on the sea, so kind of very nice simile there. The kind of roll of the army glistens like a wave, like a giant wave, when the blue wave rose nightly on the deep Galilee. So nightly Galilee. And like the leaves of the forest when the summer is green, that host with their banners at sunset were seen, like the leaves of the forest when the autumn hath blown, that host on the morrow lay withered and strown. So like the leaves of the forest when the summer is green, so all of the chlorophyll and the green, in the chlorophyll in the leaves, that gives it its very nice vivid green, that host with their banners at sunset were seen. So like the leaves of the forest when autumn hath blown, that host on the morrow lay withered and strown. So the angel of death is being compared to an autumn breeze, an autumn wind that withers and kind of scatters the army, right? So like that host with their banners at sunset were seen. So they have this golden kind of summer-like banner, but they're going to be they're confident. But they're also unaware of the change, as though like a change in the season. The angel of death is coming. For the angel of death spread his wings on the blast, and breathed in the face of the foe alliteration as he passed, and the eyes of the sleepers waxed deadly and chill. and their hearts but once heaved, and forever grew still, says Jura. And the eyes of their sleepers wax deadly and chill, still, chill, and still, blast and past. That's almost arguably a half rhyme, not quite a full rhyme. Past, blast, maybe it's a full rhyme. It's not quite rhyming. And, so we have a kind of anaphora there, repetition. It's kind of almost mimicking how a biblical passage reads. So there's kind of anaphora there. And there lay the steed with a nostril all wide, but though there it rolled not the breath of his pride, and the foam of his gasping lay white on the turf, and cold as the spray of the rock-beating surf. So the think about the contrast that are set up between the confident army, like when the forest is green in the summer, and now they are laid cold by the angel of death. So think about the contrasts that are there. So think about, so we have the bright sheen of the spears, but then we also have the kind of the darkness of the blue wave at night. So think about just those kind of oppositions between cold and warm and dark and light. And there lay the riser distorted and pale, with the dew on his brow and the rust on his mail, so the chain mail, the armour. And the tents were all silent, the banners alone, the lances unlifted, the trumpet unblown. So it's kind of, it's inversed, unlifted, unblown, alone. So these are all kind of, to rhyme something is to kind of bring it closer to the words that you're trying to rhyme with. So alone is, it rhymes with unblown. The lances are unlifted, so they've been laid still. So dew on his brow, it's still fresh, rust on his mail. So these are very kind of microscopic images. Dew on his brow, a bead of sweat, and the rust on his mail. And the widows of Asher are loud in their wail, and the idols are broke in the temple of Baal, you could say. And the might of the Gentile, unsmote by the sword, hath melted in the glance of the Lord. Okay, so the widows of Asher are loud in their wail. So Ashurbanipal is a famous Assyrian ruler, and they don't obviously worship the same gods. It's said as the Israelites, so they worship idols, the temple of Baal, the might of the Gentiles, so the non-Israelite. The might of the Assyrians basically is they weren't defeated by the sword, they were unsmote by the sword, but they've been melted like a glance of the Lord. So all it took was a kind of a breath from the angel of death, not even anything else, and they've melted like snow in the glance of the Lord. So they've become reduced like the fragility of a snowflake. They've melted like that. So that's a very nice simile there. Overall, I'm not going to go for a full analysis here, but that's hopefully helpful, I think, to you. Okay. So there's a beauty and elegance in Byron's words, and he has a very extremely careful use of colour in the poem to create a very delicate image. In other works of his, Byron attempts to drown a reader in detail references, in repeated bits of pieces of history, but this opening stanza is pretty simplistic as it goes. There is, despite the simplicity of it all, a very kind of a fierceness, a ferocity of it when he says, in the phrase, the Assyrian came down like a wolf from the fold. So this is a kind of very kind of, we know immediately that we're dealing with a predator. It's a very, as you could say, atavistic. That's Atavistic. So very primal. This is a wolf. This is someone that doesn't ask for permission. The Assyrian came down like a wolf on the fold, which is to refer to Sennacherib. And this works to evoke the image of his ferocity. So it's simple, but it works. His single-minded pursuit of Jerusalem, his grace and deadly power. The image of the wolf on the fold serves to give the reader a half view into a different world, a wild and dangerous world where the wolf is almost at the door constantly. So we notice also the brightness of the colours that we've talked about. The purple and gold are royal colours, purple being a very hard colour to get a hold of as a dye. So it was the purple of an ermine cloak. So you have ermine being the fur of a pine marten, and purple and gold are royal colours. And so Byron is almost unabashed in this description of Sennacherib. He's making him seem like a modern king, despite the fact that Sennacherib probably wouldn't have worn purple and gold because they don't have the same connotations. So it's unclear whether, Sennacherib would have actually worn purple and gold. But he's thinking about it in terms of kind of the royalty of the modern periods, kind of 18th, 19th centuries. So it's kind of a slightly amusing, anachronistic image, definitely. And the references to the points of the spears, the stars on the sea, further emphasizes Sennacherib's power. He is so unwittingly strong that he seems to encompass the universe. He becomes like a force of nature, in a way. You could say it that way. He's got a huge army, and the soldiers look like nothing more than marauding stars, gleaming larger than life in the darkness. So it's a big image, but an image of nature. They are constant, as we can tell when we read the next line, when the blue wave rolls nightly on the deep Galilee. Notice also, in this paragraph, the phrases, the quotes are only as long as the points that we're making. And we're we're taking each phrase on its own to unpack them, to describe it further. So take your time. So the Assyrian soldiers have therefore been waiting for quite some time outside the city of Jerusalem, and one can assume that this is quite late into the siege. Okay, so let's talk about this one, this stanza. Like the leaves of the forest when the summer is green, the hosts with their banners at sunset were seen. Like the leaves of the forest when autumn hath blown, that host on the morrow lay withered and strown. So you have to understand the Romantics, which Byron was considered one later by the people that sort of publish books, and think about who's been publishing in the decades that have just passed. The Romantics take in general a concern for natural phenomena, for natural stuff. So Wordsworth, the most famous Romantic, arguably, was very drawn to nature, and so it's the element of this style is that it's a return to the natural world in many ways. So there is an element in which you can see that in this poem, in Byron's poem. So it's a movement away from man-made machinery and the kind of developing world of industrial civilization, the Industrial Revolution that was happening in England at the time. So you could also argue that even though this was happening, the Romantics knew that nature, very few Romantics saw nature as unsullied, so there is no return to a kind of unspoilt paradise, but they were critical of development and industrialization, you could say. So in this verse, Byron returns to those ideals, tenets of Romanticism by comparing the invading Assyrian army to leaves in summer, plentiful, vibrant with life, very much aware of their presence in the world. I don't know about this one. I don't know if leaves are very much very much aware of their presence in the world, but they're definitely vibrant with life and plentiful, and you could say confident in their life. You could say, because in summer, leaves are having a great time, but they don't expect autumn to come so quickly as they do in the next line, you could say, in your essay. So, however, the leaves of the forest when autumn hath blown comes all too quickly, and it is amazing how this simple turn of phrase creates an image in the mind of the reader. From there he writes, the host of the morrow lay withered and strown, and it brings up a mental picture of the broken in bodies of the soldiers lying scattered all around like leaves, smote where they stood by God's avenging angel. Okay, so the final bit of it, the angel spread his wings on the blast, and breathed in the face of the foe as he passed, and the eyes of the sleepers waxed steadily and chill, and their hearts but once heaved, and forever grew still. So the third stanza, the angel of death makes his appearance. So it's a he, it's gendered, and or sexed, you could say. And one could say how Byron took the imagery to with his own artistic license. He took liberties. He had freedom there to adapt. But there is something more particularly beautiful, you could say, about how he describes the angel of death here. There isn't violence necessarily. There isn't anger. There's just a sort of, the angel of death appears to move slowly through the soldiers, breathing in their faces, and that's all that he needs to do. It helps the reader to understand just how strong the will of God is, just how terrifying and alien and deadly God's angels are. And it's worth noting that in the Bible, particularly the Old Testament, angels were considered terrifying, so they do make an appearance quite prominently in the Old Testament. They were considered otherworldly, beings that didn't look human and were horrifying to the masses. And so it wasn't surprising that the first word they spoke to the people in several instances were to not be afraid. So that is prominent in the Old Testament. Death is a gradual process, and the eyes of the sleepers wax steadily and chill, but an instant one. So it's not terribly long. It's just sort of a coldness that waxes over someone. So it's sort of a kind of spreads. A wax is a kind of it's an interesting kind of verb choice, that I think. 1 minute they are alive, they breathe, they exist. By the next they are deadly, growing cold and chilly on the ground. And there lay the steed with a nostril all wise, but though it through it there rolled not the breath of his pride, and the foam of his gasping lay white on the turf, and cold as the spray of the rock beating surf. So the rock beating surf, the rock crushing, the froth of a wave. Here Byron goes further into the explanation of the dead soldiers. And there lay the steed with his nostrils all wide, he writes, and somehow the image of the horse brought low is far more animated than the death of the soldiers. The nostrils all wide suggests that the horse gasping, the horse struggling to get air. So as Byron described it, there's an element of fighting to the way the horse died. Note the words, the foam of his gasping. Something that occurs when the horse is particularly scared or worried. So there's a struggle to breathe. Note the reference to the rock beating surf, an expression which calls back to the wildness of the waves, forever stilled now in terms of the horse. So that the waves of the sheen of the spears, the chaos has been unleashed on the wave of spears, and now expressed in terms of the horse. It is almost as though the horse understood something far more than the soldiers did, perhaps. Knew that it was dying away that the soldiers did not. I don't know too much if I agree with that, but that's fine. And there lay the rider distorted and pale, with the dew on his brow and the rust on his mail, and the tents were all silent, the banners alone, the lances unlifted, the trumpet unblown. So comparing it to the peacefulness of the death of the rider, all we are given now is a view of how he is distorted and pale, and there's dew on his brow and the rust on his mail. So that this could be any rider, any of the Assyrian riders. And the tents are all silent, the banners alone without people. Everything is still. It's still compared to the wild death of the horse, and there wasn't much silence in the previous stanza, but now there is. So there's a lot of contrast in this poem. None of the soldiers fought back, and none of the soldiers knew really what happened to them. It happened so quickly. Death was a sudden driving process, taking them unawares and breaking the army into pieces at a single night. So here we are. And the widows of Ashur are loud in their wail, and the idols are broke in the temple of Baal. And the might of the Gentile, unsmote by the sword, hath melted like slow in the glance of the Lord. However, in the final stanza, that activity returns, but not from the dead army of Sennacherib, but from others, their wives and mothers. So there's noise again after silence, and the widows of Ashur are loud in their wail. So he's sort of looking ahead, I suppose. He's looking to the reaction that will greet this news the idols are broken in the temple of Baal, showing that whatever happened to the army of Sennacherib is almost a perversity. So the Assyrians are completely broken. Briefly, we've introduced you to the poem and what it's all about and what Byron is doing in his images and or in his language, broadly speaking. So hopefully this has been very helpful. Let me know if you'd like me to send this. I can upload it. Let me know how these videos can be improved, and I will see you in the next video. Okay, thank you.